A happy Freaky Friday to you and yours. This is Bill Landis. That's Jeremy Birmingham. Thank you for joining us here on the podcast daily. Birm, last week when you weren't here, Austin and I did a mailbag on the Friday, and I felt so bad about you not being involved in that I thought we'd do a mailbag without Austin this time. What do you think?
I think the best part about that was that you said without Austin. Everything else is just seems like lip service, but being able to do that without Austin because he's on vacation-ish for a few days down in North Carolina.
Vacation. He's golfing for his birthday. It's vacation.
He's playing at Pinehurst. So yeah, I mean, I think we owe it to ourselves to try this again.
All right. Well, we got a handful of questions, a little more, I guess more than a handful. A handful's 5, right? Typically, we have more than 5 questions from our tech subscribers. All of them about like Ohio State, I think. There's not. Last week we got into some nonsense. There just wasn't a whole lot of nonsense asked to us this week. I'm sure we'll find a way.
Because they know that we're the serious ones, Bill. You and I
That's
are
right.
The deep divers, the real nitty gritty,
the thinkers, if you will. So let's get into them, shall we?
Yes.
So there were a couple, like they're not like all serious Ohio State football questions, but they're related to Ohio State football. And the news of the day, I think, for a lot of people on Thursday was the EA Sports college football video game, tweeting some more stuff out about like all the schools that are going to be in the game. I think some contracts went out to players to opt into the NIL deal that will get them into the game. By the way, Denzel Burke tweeted that he was in the game and like he's not going to be in the game. So what was that? What was that?
Why won't he be in the game?
Because it's next year. Why would he be in the game next year?
It's not. I mean, Denzel Burke is returning to Ohio State to play next year, Bill.
He's out of eligibility. This is his 4th year. He's going into his 4th
Burke?
year. Yeah.
The Ohio State cornerback who's returning to play football at Ohio State this year?
But the video game is next year.
No,
isn't it?
Comes out in July, dude.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It's this July?
Yes.
But it's 25.
Yeah, that's just what they do because that's when the championship gets played is in 2025.
Oh, okay. Well, Denzel Burke is in the game then. Forget what I said.
Yeah,
anyway,
Denzel is one of only like I think I've heard, and I'm not Matt Brown for extra points or anything, so don't hold me to this. I've heard there's only like 14 or 15 player ambassadors that EA has reached out to and asked to directly do a promotion like that, and Denzel is one of them. So it's pretty cool for him. I did see that tweet. I don't think he's the only Buckeye that will be included in that. So take that for what it's worth. And whenever
I know there's at least one more. I saw a mock-up graphic of another player.
I think I know who you're talking about, but I know that there's another player. You're talking about Caleb Downs, right?
Yes.
See, I've heard that Quinshon Judkins will be one of them as well. And this is just me spitballing. I think that they're going to do like regional / different covers for different regions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of those Buckeyes is going to be on a cover. I don't know which one, but I feel like it's going to be the surprising one. And it'll be like Quinshon Judkins on a cover.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because that was not a question we got, but I was like my question to you. I was just like curious because Doug and Matt did like a hour-long episode on the video game on Kings of the North earlier this week, and they talked about the cover. And I think that they should kind of do what you just described, like almost like the way that Phil Steele does his magazines, like regional covers. But they settled on like Lamar Jackson should be the cover guy because he never got the chance to. And I've seen some other people say like it should be a combination of all the Heisman Trophy winners who never got to be on the cover because the game hasn't existed for a decade. Where do you land on what the cover should look like?
It should be Nick Saban, and that's all that's the conversation.
You want to ask Nick option?
Yeah. Like if you're doing one national cover, it needs to be Nick Saban. In my opinion, there has been no one that has dominated college football more in the decade that it's been gone since Nick Saban. He retired. It's a perfect homage to him. It's not out of the ordinary. We've seen EA do it with Madden and stuff like that. So I would put Nick Saban. But if you're doing regional covers, then you can alleviate some of those questions, I think. But Nick Saban should be the first.
All right, Nick Saban it is. Here's our question related to the video game. We actually have 2. And I don't know. I can't remember. I think the old games used to give you like a grade. It was like your offense was an A or a C, depending on how good your team was. But John asked, can you give the offense and defense for Ohio State an NCAA football video game rating up to 99 overall? And then who do we think would be the highest rated players on the offense and the defense for Ohio State next year? Since the game is next year and not 2 years from now.
Yeah, it's coming out in July. I've already told the wife, like, I found out this week that the DLC / second part of Elden Ring comes out in June, and then college football comes out like 2 weeks later. I'm not going to see her through July. I told her, like, sorry, I'm going to be taking a vacation all the way through July until the day we have to go to Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days. I would think the defense would be probably like a 97, 95, something like that. It'd be the highest ranked defense in the game. Offense, I would probably give it like a 90, I think a 90, because you have some really high end talent, but obviously there's a couple holes that you have to fill, as we've talked about all week on the offensive line. Highest ranked individual players, now that's a different conversation. Offense, I would probably pick Travion Henderson, just because speed is going to be, it's always heavily weighted. But I could be persuaded to believe it would be Emeka Egbuka. And defensively, I think the highest rated player would be Caleb Downs, with JT Tuimoloau nipping at his heels.
Yeah, that was kind of my guess as well. And that was actually the second question we got from Zach, is like, who do we think would be the highest rated player? So Zach and John were kind of on the same wavelength there. I think my number for the defense was like a 98 overall. I agree with you that I think it would be the highest rated defense in the game. Offense, I was between like an 89 and a 91, I guess, like in that like A- kind of B+ sort of.
Well, I said 90, range. Bill. Do you know what's between 89 and 91?
90. We're of the same mind here. Offensive highest rated player, I think would probably be Quinshot Judkins, or Emeka Egbuka, but I would bet Judkins, just based off the production that he's had over the last 2 years. Travion Henderson is obviously a very talented player, but I think they would probably take that into account, that Quinshot Judkins has been the leading rusher in the Power 5 the last 2 years, and he would be the highest rated player. And then defense, probably Caleb Downs, but I could also see it being JT. Maybe I think Denzel Burke would be like in the 90-ish range, right? So I could see him being up there too, but I think it would. Caleb Downs, I would imagine, is probably the highest rated safety in the game.
Yeah, I bet he'll be like a 97 or a 98 overall start.
Yeah. So how many guys do you think would be a 90 or 90 or above?
3 on offense. Travion, Quinshon, and Emeka, I think, would all be 90 or higher on offense.
Yeah.
And defense, I would probably imagine that there would be 3 also, with JT, Denzel, and Caleb.
Yeah, I wonder about Tyleik Williams. I think maybe not quite that high. And Jack Sawyer, probably maybe not quite that high.
Yeah, I think Jack would be pushing it right on the I think Jack would probably end up being the 4th highest on the defense if I had to predict now. But it does bring up a bigger and more important question. You are not a next gen console player yet, right? You don't have a PS5 or a Xbox X Series, right?
No, I have a PS4. I've been waiting specifically for this game to justify buying a new one. So I'll do that when the game comes out.
This is where they're going to get you, because they're going to release a PS5 like Pro like 3 months after the game comes out, and then people are going to have to make these big decisions. What are you leaning in? I mean, are you definitely going PS5? Is that the target for you?
I don't know. I've had both PlayStation and Xbox in my life. I don't know that I have a preference. I would honestly probably. Well, I guess the newer generation consoles have you can like cross console online gaming, right? So
yeah.
I wouldn't have to take
but not every game though. I mean, it's not a guarantee. That's from the software people themselves. So most of the time, that's only happening in like the free games like Fortnite, etc., where you have just huge servers that are actually run through the company that produces the game, as opposed to the distributor. So that's the interesting part. But yeah, I was thinking, you're probably pretty close. You got the new WrestleMania game coming out soon. Like, shouldn't you just get the PS5 for that? Because you're a giant nerd.
Probably. It's not me that you have to convince. It's a household expenditure,
Yeah, I think you could figure out a way to get it done, Bill. But it does make me think that we should probably look into, how many teams are going to be allowed in these online dynasties, and the text subscribers from Subtext, like joining us in a league would be probably a good time.
Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah.
We should probably look into how that happens.
The problem is not everybody can be Ohio State. So then I don't.
Well, no one's allowed. That's the only answer. No one's allowed to use Ohio State if that's the case.
Okay. No, I like that idea. Yeah. I'll have to figure out what I'll do a survey of like people I want to play online and see what system they're using. And then I'll base my decision off that.
Yeah, but I mean, you may as well just dive in for the new WWE game, and then that way you have the system ready.
That's a great point. I'm going to take that to my attorney.
Tell Leah to blame me if she needs to.
Okay. All right. Here's a question from Chase. Is Jeremiah Smith the best wide receiver prospect Ohio State has ever had? I was excited for Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, etc., but this feels like a whole different level. And you have a much better perspective on this than I do. One, because you cover recruiting more closely than I do, but two, you've been an Ohio State fan for a very long time. So what do you think about Jeremiah's standing? I guess just like as a prospect, you're not putting any undue expectations on him because Lord knows he already has enough. But as a prospect, how does he stack up?
I mean, he's the best that they've ever had. That's the simple answer. If you look at it in the internet recruiting era, where obviously you have subjective rankings, but those are generally pretty good and tell a pretty complete story. Even the difference between 5 stars like Garrett Wilson or Jackson Smith and Jigba or Emeka Ibuka or Julian Fleming, to be the consensus number 1 ranked player in the country across all the major networks, like that's a totally different ball game. And Jeremiah was at that point for the majority of the cycle. I think maybe on 3 ended up going with Williams and Winari or something as the number 1 overall player, but that's because it's sexy to pick a defensive end in that spot. But as far as a wide receiver goes, to get the sort of attention and clout that he's had and the impact that he's made, and just like when you see Jeremiah Smith, like it is a different experience. If you look at the San Antonio, the All-American Bowl, and look at the way people talk about him when they're down in those national practices, and you're talking about all-star teams, and he still is just that much different than everyone else. Physically, he is so much more advanced and ready to contribute early in his career than any of these other guys were. And that's a testament to the skill that Garrett had or Jackson Smith and Jigba has, because they found a way to get on the field early because they're so skilled. But Jeremiah is that skilled and also 6'3", 215 pounds and runs like a gazelle. So like, I just don't, it's hard to really put him in the same category as any other receivers that Ohio State's had, even as great as they've been coming out of high school. Which is why I always go back to like Julio Jones, and that's the comparison that I go for with him. Julian Fleming was the number 1 ranked player overall in the country by ESPN in 2020, but it was just because he's such a physical freak. It wasn't because of his ability and his skill as a wide receiver yet. It was about the long-term projection. And obviously Julian's had a number of injuries that slowed him down, but if Jeremiah stays healthy, like I don't see how you keep him off the field this year. Yeah. I don't, you guys had a big conversation on Kings of Columbus on Thursday or Wednesday, right? About the expectations for those guys.
Yeah. One of Doug's, we did like wild predictions for the season, and I still don't know if this really qualifies as wild, but it was like Jeremiah Smith was going to break the single season freshman receiving record, but he only needs like 500 yards to do it. Like, will he shatter it? Like I asked Doug how far he wanted to push it, and I asked him if he'd say 1,000 yards, and he said no. But I think like if we're going to talk about him in the terms that you just did, aiming for 500 almost seems low, no?
Yeah, I mean, what are you talking? 35 catches to get there? 30?
Yeah, I think Garrett Wilson flirted with 500 his freshman year, and I think he had like 35, 37 catches, something like that.
Yeah, and Jeremiah certainly is a different type of receiver who maybe will have more, downfield catches than Garrett did. So, I mean, I think you'd need 30 catches at like 15 yards of reception, right? To get close to that. So that's what, 450 yards if you do that. So I think you certainly can do it. I think a lot of that depends on just the rest of the offense, not him. What they decide to do when you have the running game that you expect to have. So I don't know that you need to get that from him to prove what he's worth, but the kid is going to be making highlights early in his career. And I think Buckeyes fans should be thrilled to get to see him on April 13th in the spring game. Buy your tickets.
I'm thrilled to see him on March 5th for the first day of spring practice. All right, here's a question from Jordan. Ohio State should have a top 5 offensive line in the country every single year, and everything else is unacceptable. Really, you set the bar really high there. If the offensive line underperforms again, do you think they'll be looking for a new offensive line coach after this season? I need to know what top 5 offensive line means.
Yeah, how do you measure that?
How do you quantify that? I'm not entirely sure, because even something like Joe Moore Award finalist is like still very subjective. And I've certainly disagreed with some of the offensive lines that have won that award over the years. So like I don't really know how you'd measure top 5. Like if you want to say like Ohio State should have one of the best offensive lines in the country every year, I think that's probably good enough. And certainly they didn't have that last year. But I don't know. Like I've seen a lot of this about Justin Fry, and we talked about it a little bit when we did the offensive line preview on the podcast daily the other day. I don't know that I believe that Justin Fry is on like shaky ground here. Like I think there was an understanding that he kind of had to rebuild that offensive line room a little bit, and I guess we could analyze whether or not he's doing that well enough. But I always kind of viewed that as like a multi-year project to get that entire room, not just the starters, the whole room, to the level where Ohio State needs it to be. And I totally agree that last year was not up to the standard. And if it's not again this year, I think I'd be surprised by that. But if it's not, then maybe we do have to have that conversation. But I'm not sure that Justin Fry is in like coach for his job, in a position to coach for his job this year. Do you?
No, not necessarily, but I'll play devil's advocate and say that if the offensive line is not better than it was a year ago, or if it's a problem as it was a year ago, then the entire coaching staff is coaching for their job, because it's going to lead to some really bad things. I think that the standard should be basically Ohio State should always have 2 or 3 NFL prospects on their offensive line starting. Like that, to me, that is a fairest place to start the conversation. They did not have that a year ago. I think you can look at the line and the guys that started and how they played, and you might be able to get there with Josh Simmons and with Donovan Jackson. I don't know that there's another guy even Matthew Jones, who played 6 years, played pretty well. I don't think you look at him and think that's a surefire NFL player.
We'll see.
I don't think. Yeah, I mean, it's on the fence. I mean, so to me, that's kind of where I go. And I look at last year's line and think about just the shell shock that Ohio State had to deal with when they lost Luke Whippler and DeJuan Jones. And that was just not part of the plan. And when you're Justin Fry, that throws you for a loop, and you get put in a position where the restructuring, the rebuilding of that room, which you knew was going to be a multi-year project, got put on, the expedite cycle. And it just didn't work the way that you'd want it to. I said on Thursday's podcast daily, like the talent floor in this current offensive line room is so much higher than it was 3 years ago that I can understand where people look at it and say, okay, well, why aren't these guys playing yet? But that's just not the way it goes. There's not Paris Johnsons every year. And the expectation that Ohio State should be able to always sign the best offensive lineman from wherever they are is just not factually accurate. They've never done that.
They've never done it. Yeah.
They've never been going out and just pulling the best offensive lineman from Texas or from Georgia or from California. Like, it happens once every couple of years, but generally speaking, it's because a player like Donovan Jackson had severe ties to Ohio. That's how it works. And that's, or Demetrius Knox from Texas, who had Ohio ties. Like there's things like that you have to find, and that's just not normal. It's not. I don't know where the expectation has come from that Ohio State always signs top 4, top 5 offensive tackles from all over the country. That's just not. I mean, just go back and look at it. It's just not the way it is. Nick Petit-Frere, sure.
I was going to say he's probably He had the relationship with Greg Schiano though that was like kind of a unique thing, right? It's not.
Yes.
And let's like we can't say like recruiting's all about relationships and then like dismiss recruiting wins because they happen to be due to relationships, right? But I do think that there are not many instances of Ohio State like getting a top 100 offensive tackle from outside of the Midwest who had no obvious ties to anything at Ohio State, right? I don't know that I can think of one off the top of my head.
Very rare.
So, and that's not to say like expectations shouldn't change, I suppose. Like I think Ohio State should still try to get guys like that, but like you said, it's not something that's happened routinely or really ever at Ohio State, which is it's not. I think it's true of most places. Like I think offensive line is maybe the position like most tied to like regionality and recruiting. I don't know. I don't know that off like, for sure, but I would say so anecdotally. It just kind of feels that way.
It's the mama's boys. It's the big boys who they don't want to leave home. That's the nature of the position. It's a position that's full of very cerebral, very like the gentle giant, mythos. Like that's who they are. They don't like to leave home. They're kids that like to commit early and stay out of the spotlight. And it's just, when you're talking about Ohio State recruiting on the national stage, you're recruiting to try to find those guys where they live and meet them where they live. But Georgia lives there. Texas lives there. Like that's the problem. Yeah. You have a battle like last year with Brandon Baker from California, who, it's Ohio State or Texas. And you think, hey, we got a shot here. You lose to Texas. That's the way it goes. At that point, Ohio State's ability to really put together a functioning NIL plan was not the same as it is now. And we'll see if that impacts things moving forward in the class of 2025. But for Ohio State and the offensive line to be successful, like you have to have Carter Lowe's in Ohio. And that's where you win. That's where, if you look at the class of 2023 with Luke Montgomery and Austin Sareveld and Josh Padilla, like that's where you have to start the foundation. So 2025, you have Carter Lowe. 2026, there's already 3 offensive linemen in the state of Ohio that the Buckeyes have offered in Sam Greer, Max Riley, and kid at St. Ignatius, Will Conroy. Like, so you're already finding the Buckeyes getting much more aggressive in the state because they realize like that's where the bread is buttered. You got to make sure that you win those battles because recruiting and developing on the offensive line is a 3-year like runway. So you have to just start finding those guys and making sure that those players don't end up going to Michigan State or Kentucky or wherever. You look at Kentucky with Darian Kennard over the last couple of years. They had a kid from Toledo whose name is escaping me, who's playing in the NFL. Like they go out and recruit those second tier offensive linemen. But Ohio kids, like they get it. They're smart football players and they develop later, but you just have to have a steady pipeline of them to keep that working. And then occasionally, if you're lucky, sprinkle in the Paris Johnson.
Yeah, that was always the thing for me. Like, and listen, I would love it if Ohio State could get Brandon Baker. And if you're an Ohio State fan who wants to see Brandon Baker wearing scarlet and gray, like I'm right there with you. But my thing with the offensive line under Greg Studrawa was not so much the big swings and misses on the national targets. It was poor evaluations, I think, on the kids in Ohio that you're talking about. It's the floor of the room. Just like too many guys year over year that were in the offensive line room who, no offense, like I just didn't think were Ohio State caliber players, never really had a chance to become one. I look at the room now and like with the exception, I don't mean to single him out, like Enith Omahi is a guy who's been here a while and struggled to find a starting role. But aside from him, like I don't know that I look at the room and think like that guy's got no shot to play here. Yeah. So I think that Justin Fry has done a much better job in that regard.
But Enith Omahi is the prime example of why, like, the idea of go out recruit national offensive linemen, it's not like it changes the outcome. I mean, he was a top 100 player when the Ohio State recruited him out of Hawaii in 2019. Like, so you still have the same risks, but very rarely does a guy stick around for 6 years from Hawaii instead of transferring home after 3 years. If you recruit kids from Ohio, at least you have a better chance of keeping them in the program as they develop. And then again, hope that you can throw in like the occasional superstar offensive lineman that the Paris Johnsons of the world, or the Nick Petit Freres, et cetera. But I mean, even in Nick Petit Frere's case, Ohio State landed Nick Petit Frere because they missed on Jackson Carman. So like, it's not like you have, like this surefire. It's not as easy as recruiting other positions, period, for a number of reasons.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think it's a point worth reiterating when we talk about it, and it's not excuse making for Justin Fry. I think
they got to be
part.
better.
They have to be better. I don't think anyone's disputing that, but I don't think Justin Fry like needs to recruit like Brian Hartline or else, I guess, is maybe the way that I would put it. All right, let's move on to another question here. A little bit of a later one, less tied to Ohio State, but still college football related. From Kyle, if you had the choice to make the location of the national championship game permanently at the Rose Bowl, at the defending champions' home stadium, or the current system where it moves around, which would you choose? I'm not putting it at the current champions' home stadium. I'll tell you
no, me neither. I also hated covering the Rose Bowl. So I guess this is one of those questions where I ask, are we supposed to consider it from a fan perspective or our job perspective? Because covering a game at the Rose Bowl is miserable. Watching a game there as a fan is pretty freaking cool. So
yeah, I would say from the fan perspective, yes.
If I could take the Rose Bowl and put it in the middle of the country, I'd do that. But I can't.
Same setting, but it's just like in Kansas instead of Pasadena.
Yeah, because getting to California is awful. Driving in California is awful. Like, it's super expensive for people to get to. Keep me the system it is now. Rotate it around the country and let different parts of the country host and see who's, let people get a sense of what college football means in different regions. I think that's the best way.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like I do like the Rose Bowl. It is logistically a little bit of a nightmare. But like once you're in your seat watching the game, it's very cool. And I think when you're watching the Rose Bowl on TV, like it feels like college football. So like I get why people would want to put it there permanently. And I don't think I'd put up much of a fight if they decided to do that. But I like moving around the country. I just wish that it would move around to like the whole country and not just like bounce around the South. Like I know they played in Indy a couple of years ago. I like to see them play it in Detroit, play it in Minneapolis. I realize you want climate controlled venues.
Yeah, but you have those in Detroit, and
Minneapolis. But you have those, but you
don't have them in the Northeast.
You don't have them in the Northeast. You have more of them in the Midwest than you used to. And like I think maybe like the Cleveland might be getting a dome stadium sometime in the next couple of years. Like that would be cool to see it played there. So as long as you're going to tell me that there's more trips up north for the national championship as you move it around, I think I'd be okay with that.
I would much rather it be in Phoenix than LA. Let me just say that. Did you know I used to live in Phoenix?
I did. As long as they do something about that grass at that stadium, then I'm fine with that too. Because that place is like this ice skating rink.
Yeah, I prefer Arizona over LA.
All right. Got a couple more questions here. Here's one from Anthony. I like that he lumped the two of these guys together. With Corey Dennis and Bill O'Brien both gone, who do you expect to be the primary recruiter developer for quarterbacks? I think it's fair to say Chip Kelly doesn't quite have the QB background that Bill O'Brien has. Does it just default back to Ryan Day? And he says that would seem counterintuitive. Is it possible that this means someone like Todd Fitch has more responsibility in quarterback development? Chip Kelly's a quarterbacks coach, so like he's not known for it, but like he's had a number of years as the quarterbacks coach.
Didn't he develop a Heisman winner at quarterback?
He recruited, and
or are we going to credit Mark Helfrich for that?
Well, the year that Marcus Mariota won the Heisman, Chip was not the head coach, but Chip did recruit Marcus Mariota. Yeah.
And develop him, I would assume, those first couple years before he left.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think Chip, I don't know if Marcus Mariota ever actually started for Chip Kelly.
Bottom line is, I think that the answer to the question is a combination of things. Yes, Todd Fitch will be more involved probably in the day-to-day operation, the day-to-day mechanical stuff with the quarterbacks, but he has been doing that anyway. I don't know that it will necessarily be more than before, but maybe it's going to be talked about more than before because Ryan Day will not be as involved. And so maybe that you'll see Todd Fitch have to balance it out. But Ryan Day will still be very involved in helping select the quarterback that they recruit. And when the starter is named and figured out, I just have a tough time believing Ryan Day is not going to find himself in that quarterback room with that quarterback a lot of the time. Even, no matter how much he doesn't want to do it, no matter how much he wants to go full CEO, he's already removed himself from the play calling part of the job. And now if he takes away the other part that he truly loves, the quarterback play, I think that you'd see a less happy Ryan Day. So I would imagine he's going to still be involved there. I thought it was interesting this week. Chip Kelly, we have pretty low expectations of what to think that he'll do as a recruiter. But the first thing that happened really after getting named was Ohio State offered a 2026 quarterback from out in California named Brady Smigel, who is probably going to be the number 1 or number 2 ranked quarterback in the country in the class of 2026. Now that Julian Lewis has reclassified to 2025. And Smigel told me that the primary guy recruiting him all along has been Chip Kelly. And so it was like kind of interesting that the first thing he did when he got there was like, hey, this is a quarterback I need you to look at. So like there's at least some impulse there from Chip Kelly to be like, let's work on this. But I don't know why people think he can't coach quarterbacks.
Yeah, I don't know why. I think he just has his reputation like as a play caller kind of precedes him, and people don't realize that he did that. But he coached quarterbacks at Oregon. He coached them at New Hampshire, and he even this past season when UCLA lost its quarterbacks coach to Oregon State, like right after the season, and that Chip Kelly was the quarterbacks coach like for bowl prep. And I think that's actually part of the nudge where like he's like, I don't want to be a head coach anymore. I just want to be a coordinator and a position coach. So like he definitely has the pedigree. I think he certainly knows like what a good quarterback looks like. And I mean,
he recruited and signed the nation's number 1 quarterback 2 classes ago. So I think he to UCLA of all places.
Yeah, I think he might be underrated as a quarterback developer. So I think he's got a big hand in this. And Todd Fitch has had a big role since he's been here, and I expect that they continue. We'll see about Ryan Day. Like I think I don't think he'll ever fully let go of the quarterback position, nor do I think he should. But I would hope with the experience of Todd Fitch and Chip, and more importantly Chip Kelly now running that room, that Ryan Day would feel like less of an obligation to be in that room as much as he maybe was previously when Corey Dennis was the coach. But he'll still have his hands on it, like from recruiting through a development process. I don't see how he can ever fully give it up.
I don't know. I think about it like a guy who starts at a company working in the mailroom and then moves his way up, and then he's working in sales, and then he continues to get promoted, and he ends up being the CEO. I think sometimes the ability to just go back and sort mail and like get back to your roots of what made you fall in love with the company to begin with is really enticing to people. And I just don't think Ryan Day will leave that room alone completely.
Yeah. Recruiting question for you, because the folks knew you were going to be taking questions on this episode of the Daily Birm. This is from Zane. And I know you wrote about this a little bit earlier this week. Who are 4 or 5 guys on James Laurinaitis's realistic short list for linebacker targets in the 2025 class?
Well, they've got 1 commitment in Eli Lee in the class of 2025. So that's 1. TJ Alford, Tarvos Alford from Vero Beach, Florida. He's a 6'2.5", 6'3", 215 pound outside linebacker. He's definitely at the top of the list. Like if you're looking at who's the guy they think they have to get, like it would be Alford. That's going to be a fight with Miami. I think there's some back and forth in the family of like, do they want him to go that far away from home? There's a couple kids in Texas, Riley Pettyjohn, who will be visiting Ohio State, I think on March 9th. He's a big one. Elijah Barnes, another one in Texas on the list very highly. Elijah Melendez, Miami commitment out of Kissimmee, Florida, very high on the list. And then there's others like Madden Faramo out in California who are on the list. I'm not sure. I think he's sort of fallen down a touch in the last couple months as evaluations have continued elsewhere. And then in the state, you look at maybe a guy like Dante McClellan up at Canton McKinley, who I think might be the best cover linebacker I've ever seen in a high school setting. Like he might be the best pass defending linebacker I've ever seen in that spot. Like he's really, really good at it, to the point where I don't know that he's a guy who couldn't end up being like a real big safety down the road because he's that good at it. But we'll see how big he gets. Jim Knowles seems to really love Dante McClellan, but that's where I would say they did offer a new kid on Wednesday night from Georgia, whose name is escaping me. I wrote about it a little bit in the morning on Thursday. Bill, do you have that story pulled up by any chance?
I can have it pulled up here in a second.
I got it. Jaden Harmon from Rome, Georgia. He's another one, more of a hybrid player, 6'2", 205, 6'2", 210, sort of in that Troy Bowles mold that Ohio State tried to go get a couple guys in the class of 2023 and missed. And Harmon told me like it's a little late but Ohio State is not too late because it's Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Georgia has not offered yet. That's the big one down there, but it's at least enough of a time for James Laurinaitis to get involved, and he's really impressed Ohio State on film. So that group is where I would think you'd be really looking. There's a couple others like two kids at IMG. Nix is one. But the group is focused really on that core group of TJ Alford, Elijah Melendez, Elijah Barnes, and the other kid from Texas whose name is just, my brain is just falling apart. Yeah, Riley Pettyjohn, who's again, that's the group where like that's where the first kids will be. That's the circle them, underline them, must get types. That's where they are.
I liked McClellan at the camp last summer. He was the one that was like Jim Knowles wouldn't leave alone the entire time he was working out. He is a good athlete.
I saw him at the Rivals Camp Series last year, and then the Under Armour Camp Series, and almost inevitably in those settings, the linebackers are at a huge disadvantage when they do the cat and mouse drills, when they do the coverage drills, and he was like regularly locking people down. That just never happens in those settings. So it was eye-opening to see, and he's a player that I think like his best football is definitely ahead of him, but I don't know if that's going to end up working out for him at Ohio State. But like you're going to see him at Wisconsin or something like that, and he's going to be a superstar. I just feel it.
Surely people won't feel some type of way about that when that happens. Yeah. All right, last question from Ben. Every year since 2018, with the exception of 2020, Ohio State has sent a player to New York as a Heisman finalist. Who do you think is the most likely candidate at the end of the 2024 season to be in the Heisman running?
That's a good question. Who do you think it is?
It's a good question because I don't think you can just default to the quarterback, right? Like, not that Will Howard definitely won't be good enough to get there, but there's enough questions about him that you don't just automatically go like, oh yeah, it's going to be him. And if I have to pick someone on the offense, I don't know that I go to him first. I honestly, I might go to like Quinshad Judkins. And I guess it's a question of like, who of the two running backs do you think is going to be the most productive, or does the presence of both of them make it unlikely that either of them would be a Heisman Trophy candidate? I guess that would be a fair question.
Yeah, that's how I would view it.
Yeah, I think they're going to run the ball a lot, to the point that I predicted in Kings of Columbus on Wednesday that they're going to lead the Bauer 5 in rushing. So if I believe that strongly that they're going to run the ball well and run it a lot, I'll say Quinshad Judkins with the asterisk there that it might be difficult in a 2 running back role for either of them to get there.
What does he have to do statistically in your mind to get there, though? Because I think, like, no matter, even if they do lead the country in rushing, you have the split between Travion and Quinshon and the yards that Will Howard picks up and the Dallin Hayden efforts. You know,
I think he would have to, like, obviously there's a minimum threshold for rushing yards, like, and it's probably like 1,300 or above. But I can see a world where like both of them, Quinshad Judkins would have to be over 1,000 yards rushing, definitely, and like Travion could be like right there and perhaps over himself. But Quinshon would have to like punctuate all the drives. Like if he could have like a Blake Corum season where like Blake Corum had like 25-yard rushing touchdowns, and no one like bothered to look like whether or not he was just punching in stuff from the goal line or if they actually had to work for those touchdowns. I think that's the kind of season. Like if he can get like close to 20 rushing touchdowns just because he's the guy who finishes drives for you, and like 1,300 rushing yards, I think that could get him there.
See, I think you could get a year out of Travion where he has 800 rushing and 500 receiving, and 15 touchdown total, and that could open the door for Quinshon. I don't know that Ohio State gets where it needs to go without Will Howard being a Heisman candidate this year. I think like he has to be that elevated as a passer, even with the running game being as potentially dynamic and hard to stop as it can be. I think Will Howard, if you give him 2,800, 3,000 passing yards on this season and 400 yards rushing and 8 rushing touchdowns and 35 passing touchdowns, I think that's a compelling case for provided Ohio State's, undefeated or in the top 4 heading into the Big Ten championship game. Like I think that that's not an altogether unrealistic season. I mean, you're talking 12 games and then the playoffs. So you could have 12. That's only 250 yards passing a game, right? Like, and 2 or 3 touchdowns a game total. I don't know. I would like to see something really pop this year. I'm excited to see like Carnell Tate and these other guys pop, but like it's a quarterback award. And if the Buckeyes are doing what they should do with their full offense, unless you, again, like your point is valid. If Quinshon Judkins has a break quorum 23 rushing touchdowns, like that's a different ball game. But I'll go with Will Howard because I think you can get him to 2,900 passing, 400, 500 rushing, and a 40 total touchdowns pretty easy.
Yeah, I think 3,500 yards, like no matter how it shakes out, and 40 touchdowns probably does get him there. I think Emeka Egbuka is like an interesting wild card. Like if Ohio State's offense is like back to what people expect it to be, that's like mainly from a point production standpoint, which they weren't last year. And he's their leading receiver, but then maybe on top of that, Chip Kelly gets a little creative with him, like in the run game as well. And he's a guy that's getting a couple of touches that way per game, which like maybe that's unlikely to happen with the running back talent that they have. But I don't know. Chip Kelly seems to be like a guy who's like going to try to use all the weapons he has at his disposal and like in the most creative ways he can. So I could see a season for Emeka where he is a dual threat in the sense of being a receiving and a rushing threat that piques the interest of people around the country in a way that could get him some consideration. It's like a dark horse kind of guy on the offense.
My dark horse / wild card will be Caleb Downs because I think all of the hype that is around him heading into his sophomore season, let's say he has 4 interceptions, returns 1 or 2 for a touchdown. Say he gets a punt return that he returns for a touchdown. And then you throw in a wrinkle where he has a rushing touchdown or a receiving touchdown coming out of the backfield and playing on offense. And he ends up leading the team in tackles and the Buckeyes are playing for a national championship. I think you could see that unfolding for him because there's not heading into 2024, like the quarterback situation around the country is going to be pretty interesting. I think I don't know that there's no Jaden Daniels. There's no Caleb Williams. There's nothing like that where you're like, oh, what about this guy? He's going to have to win it. I think you could see that type of year for Caleb Downs if he has the opportunity to do some, niche things on offense or with the ball in his hands.
2016, Jabril Peppers was 5th in the Heisman voting.
Yeah. I mean, Caleb Downs can be a Jabril Peppers type player for sure.
Yeah. That's interesting. Can you wager on that? Is there anywhere? That feels like it's worth a sprinkle.
He's a top tenner.
Feels like it's worth a sprinkle if you can. I can. I'm not allowed. I vote on that, so I can't bet on it. But
no, well, I'm allowed.
Yeah, if you don't vote, then maybe it's worth taking a look at because I actually can listen. Like the defensive player, a guy who plays defense primarily hasn't won it since Charles Woodson. So it's probably
he's the only one that's ever won it.
And he's the only one that's ever done it. And like there have been guys who have come close, but the question was finalists. And you can't bet on finalists, I don't think. I wish you could. Like you can only bet.
Yeah, and plus, let's talk to the Heisman voters. I know Doug has ranted about this before, but shouldn't it just can we just agree that it needs to be 5 finalists and just be done with it?
I think it should be 5, and I think it should be that you set the 5 before the postseason, and then you actually vote on it after the postseason.
Yeah, that Heisman vote happening and the Heisman Award being given out in December, especially now when we're talking like 4 games after that, that's ludicrous. That needs to now happen mid-January.
Yep, I agree. We're gonna make the change. We could be the change you want to see in the world.
We're gonna make a change.
Yeah.
Once in our lives, we're gonna feel real good. We're gonna make a difference.
Just gonna see how far you take that. I think Birm doing.
We're gonna make it right.
It's a good place to end the show, unless you want to keep singing. You have any human nature? Yeah, human nature is my favorite.
That's a good spot to end it. So this has been fun.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for sending in your questions. We appreciate it. If you want to send in questions for a future show, you can be a tech subscriber. 614-662-4509 is where you can join us a 2-week free trial. And then if you hate it, you can cancel it. And it's really easy.
Yeah.
Just
And maybe
stop.
you'll get to play in our NCAA 2025, online league.
Yeah. And now would be a decent time to start because spring ball is starting up soon and we're going to have some practice access and we'll be texting a lot of the things that we see at practice there to that number. So if you've been considering it, I would suggest now is a pretty good time. And again, if you don't like it, you get 2 weeks to see if it's your cup of tea or not. And if not, you can leave us and no harm done. So thank you again for sending in those questions. Thank you those of you who listened to this here episode of the podcast daily. We hope you enjoy your weekend. For Birm, I'm Bill. We'll talk to you later.